Welcome back to the panel discussion, Trends in Satellite Acquisition, Augmenting Government SATCOM, sponsored by SES Government Solutions here on Federal News Radio 1500 AM and federalnewsradio.com. Our guests today are Aaron Miller, the Chief of the Services Division of SATCOM Center at the Defense Information Systems Agency, and Ben Camerlin. He is the SATCOM Program Manager at the General Services Administration. I'm your moderator, Tom Temin. And let's just discuss a few of the basic terminology that people that either are or will be involved in satellite communications are going to need to know. And so we'll just walk through this very quickly, but there's something called GEO, MEO, and LEO, referring to the different heights of the satellites. Just give us a quick rundown, Aaron, on what that means and what how the capabilities of those different satellites come into play.
Sure. GEO stands for geostationary or geosynchronous orbit. Those are the satellites that are at the highest altitude, about 25,000 miles from Earth. And they provide global or spot beam coverage to the Earth. I think some of the benefits of them are with as little as 3 or 4 satellites, you can get total coverage around the Earth. Typically, those are your long-range communications type satellites. They can have Earth coverage horns, provide coverage for, let's say, 1/3 of the Earth. Some of the drawbacks are latency. There's about 250 millisecond delay between Earth and the satellite because it is so high up in Earth orbit. But it brings a lot of capability to the fight. Only buying a few satellites, you can get total coverage around Earth. Now, MEO is middle Earth orbit or medium Earth orbit. You need more satellites, but it's also lower, so you cut down on your latency. The satellites are a little less expensive, but you need a tracking antenna because the satellites move from horizon to horizon. So more satellites will be needed in a plane in order for you to communicate. And also, like I said, you need a higher technical terminal with auto tracking to track, and then you have issues with handover as it passes the horizon. You have to swing back.
One disappears, another one comes in.
Reappears, and they have to swing back and track the next satellite.
And not lose any signal in between when it's switching from one to the other.
Yes, it's a minimal loss, but you're not really losing signal. You just have a little bit of a delay. And I think these are newer entrants into the communications market, and they provide a lot of utility. I think cruise ships are using them a lot to increase that capability. So when you're on a cruise, you can still reach back and check your email. I think that'll be the biggest notice that the general public has about this capability.
We can hardly wait.
And then the low Earth orbit satellites, it requires a lot more satellites. They're even lower to the Earth, but they support things like the polar regions and provide a lot of handheld support. At least that's what they do to use it for. We have our program with Iridium on our handheld services. So each one has its place. Each one brings a unique capability, whether it's mobile or handheld, or whether it's the larger fixed station up at GEO.
Okay, and Ben, do the ComSat contracts at GSA include all of those services that are available through the 3 different heights?
Yes, absolutely. The FCSA contract vehicles, you are able to procure any type of commercially available satellite communications on them. So we predominantly acquire GEO satellites right now. That's the largest area of spend in the federal government for commercial satellite communications. And then the second largest would be the low Earth orbit, as Aaron spoke to. A lot of the federal government also uses the small handheld satellite phones for remote locations and personnel tracking devices.
So in that case, you would have a particular geographical area that your phone can be used in.
Well, the advantage of the LEO satellites is they offer basically global coverage. So you can take that same phone.
There's a lot of them.
There's a lot of them, yeah. I think the Iridium constellation, which is the predominant low Earth orbit satellite constellation, there's 66 satellites around polar orbit, whereas, as Aaron had mentioned, a GEO satellite, you can cover 1/3 of the globe basically with one satellite.
All right, and then there's something, let's get beyond some of the basics here to some of the innovations that are going on in SATCOM, and there's a program called Pathfinder. Tell us about that one.
Well, the Pathfinder program was developed in response to language in the FY14 National Defense Authorization Act, where the Secretary of Defense was asked to recommend specific Pathfinder programs or initiatives to move ComSatCom forward. And there are 10 Pathfinders, 5 executed by the Air Force and 5 executed by DISA. And the Pathfinders are centered around gaining a better understanding of our requirements, looking for innovative ways to acquire SATCOM, looking for utilization and our utilization monitoring to find out what our usage habits are. And lastly, looking for alternative means of management, see if we can gain efficiency through changing how we manage. So these Pathfinders started, I guess, around a year and a half ago. The first Pathfinder, the Air Force Pathfinder 1, was awarded. It was a great price point, and now the challenge becomes how do we leverage that investment and use that service to basically make a return on that investment. The other Pathfinders are ongoing, and all are meant to inform our future analysis of alternatives for wideband, which is expected in FY17, where we're going to have to make a decision what we do with the next phase of SATCOM. How do we replenish this capability? Do we buy more? Do we leverage commercial? Do we use things like hosted payloads? Are we going to use things like long-term leases? So that's where we really have to understand the industry and where industry is going so we can make that proper investment.
Okay, that's interesting. So I guess also with the GSA, is there kind of an analog to that program where you try to educate people on good acquisition strategies for satellite communications?
Sure, absolutely. And as Aaron had mentioned, we're not really daily involved in the Pathfinder effort, but we are looking at a lot of alternative acquisition strategies and fully supportive of DISA and their Pathfinder approaches with ensuring that our contracts are flexible enough if they want to do a long multi-year lease or something that we can do that. One of the other things is, as we'd mentioned, with a lot of the emerging technologies and satellites coming on the market, such as O3B, the medium Earth orbit satellite, as Aaron had mentioned, that does require specialized terminals where you have to essentially have 2 ground terminals for each user location to track the satellites and pick them up as they cross the horizon. So we're looking at making sure that we can accommodate on our vehicles where industry can provide a service to the federal government where the terminal is included in the price of the bandwidth, essentially lease the terminal, or similar to how your cable modem is kind of included in the price of what you pay for internet. That's incorporated so federal government users don't have to make another investment in another terminal that'll only work on one satellite. They can use that capability while they have that contract, and then basically return those terminals back when the contract expires.
Sure. Now, the satellite for the supplier is a fixed asset, and when you mention long-term lease, it sounds like there's a trade-off between maybe getting the best possible price on a immediate need versus having, or maybe if there's a higher priced situation, or maybe getting a better price if you sign into a long-term contract because the capacity is there and it's fixed in a satellite, and the satellite as an asset to the supplier is a kind of a fixed cost.
Right, and this is something that, like I said before, it's a struggle. On the one hand, you mentioned earlier what they call the spot market leases. It does give you some additional flexibility. Most of our leases are multi-year, where we have a base year and option years. What we find that the pricing that we're getting is comparable to a multiple year for 5 years contract. But at the same time, we have the flexibility to where if the requirement changes or if the requirement is no longer needed in the 2nd or 3rd year, we can terminate that contract or not exercise the option and then move to a newer location. So we're stuck with trying to balance getting the best investment price with being able to consume that to get a return on the investment.
Yeah, because you don't want latent capacity because you're paying for it, sure. And once it goes away, you never get it back.
Yeah, we like to use the example of that giant jar of peanut butter. I mean, you get a great price per ounce, but if you're not running a daycare, you might not be able to consume it all and you have waste. So we want to make sure we're buying getting the optimum mix, buying the right size so that we can fully leverage it and take advantage of that great price point.
All right, so no green and fuzzy satellites. On that note, we'll take a short break. Our guests today are Aaron Miller. He's the Chief of the Services Division for SATCOM Center at the Defense Information Systems Agency, and Ben Camerlin is the SATCOM Program Manager at the General Services Administration. I'm your moderator, Tom Temin. This is Trends in Satellite Acquisition, Augmenting Government SATCOM, sponsored by SES Government Solutions, here on Federal News Radio 1500 AM and federalnewsradio.com.